Hello and welcome to another episode of Bitesize Agility. I'm Emily Ruffle, Head of Insights at the Agile Business Consortium, and today I'm joined with Andrew Craddock, current chair of the consortium, Agile trainer and coach, and one of the creators who helped develop the Business Agility framework. Hi Andrew.
Hello everybody.
So Andrew, if we could start with, in your own words, what is business agility and what is the difference between, say, a normal business?
Okay, well, for me, an agile business is one that's able to thrive in our modern VUCA world. So that's the world characterized by volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And I think it's characterized by two key features. The first one is really an all-encompassing, customer-centric business purpose. So it's a star that shines brightly enough to cut through that sort of VUCA fog and provide an enduring and inspirational focus for everybody in the organization to be guided by. So that's the first thing, that focus. And the second thing is about the sort of the people-centered approach to delivering the products and services that are needed to achieve that purpose. And that needs to be itself based on a really sort of collaborative, empowered, team-based working that brings all that together. So I think it's those two dimensions, the focus and the way that things are delivered within an organization. I think the customer-centric purpose is critical because everything else really should flow from that. So things like profitability, rather than focusing on profitability, it's better to focus on the customer service that lots of happy customers will give then the profitability the company needs. So actually putting that customer centricity first really helps. And in my experience, individuals in a workforce are really impassioned by the idea of generating shareholder wealth. They're much more likely to be impassioned by helping people, helping customers. They'll get a buzz from making people's lives happier or healthier or easier or whatever that might be. And I think playing into the people-centric element, if people get a buzz out of that sort of thing, then that buzz can only be amplified by a feeling that each individual involved is really making a personal contribution to the cause. And when I was sort of thinking about this particular question, what came to my mind was a story I heard years ago, actually, about President John F. Kennedy and a janitor in NASA back in 1962. So the story here goes that President Kennedy was doing his first tour of a NASA facility in 1962. So this was after he had set the mission to put a man on the moon before the end of the decade.
Yeah.
And he came across this janitor in a hallway, and he asked the janitor who he was and what he was doing, which, probably considering he was dressed like a janitor, was a bit of an unusual question to ask, but that's what he did. But the response that the janitor gave was really very surprising. He said that he was there to help put a man on the moon. Yeah. So when you think about that and the alignment of purpose around the whole mission of NASA to put a man on the moon before the end of the decade and bring them safely back to Earth, the fact that the janitor believed that he was a part of the team that was contributing to make that happen was a really powerful thing. And the reality is that NASA achieved something close to impossible back in the 1960s. These days we've got more sort of computer power on our wrist, than we have than they had on the space capsule that went to the moon and back. And if you think about that crystal clear purpose and the inspirational leadership, when he said, we're not doing it because it's easy, we're doing it because it's hard, and things like that, that really sort of inspired people to achieve. And that sort of truly incredible sort of sense of team. That's just the only way, really, by bringing those things together, that such a thing could have been achieved in 1969, I think.
That's remarkable, isn't it? With it's such a solid vision across the whole organization.
Yeah, and if you think about the purpose of a company, whatever that company might be, if you can get that level of clarity that everybody can understand what they're there to achieve, what the company is there to achieve, and the contribution they can make to it, then that's how organizations really have the ability to thrive. If they've got that focus, that bright guiding star that cuts through that volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity that might otherwise just swamp it. And I think it does in some organizations.
That's a really good point. I guess this kind of leads on, can you explain how the business agility framework came about and sort of what it means to others?
Yeah, sure. Well, it really came from a collective realization amongst a number of us who were thinking about some of the challenges around Agile, primarily in the IT and project space, actually. That a realization that the underpinnings of the agility as applied to IT was really just as applicable to business as a whole, and particularly the personal behaviors and characteristics and that sort of thing that made Agile working so productive was exactly the sort of thing that could be scaled up to a business as a whole. And from a purely personal perspective, I was just hitting that point in my career. I've since 2001, I've been as a consultant, I've been helping organizations try to become more agile. And one of the things that was really starting to get me down as a person was the fact that it was sort of standards of corporate behavior and all of that sort of stuff in organizations that were really suppressing the agility that small teams were trying to engage in at a working level in an IT department, for example.
Yeah.
It was it was things like the whole agile thing is about collaborative working and a whole team moving forward on that sort of clear focus that I just described earlier on. And you sort of put that up against a sort of corporate project management office who are wanting loads of statistics around productivity and progress and all of this sort of stuff, which the two things really don't marry. That sort of traditional demand for data that can be rolled up and up and up until it sits on a CEO's desk just doesn't really work when what actually you've got are people talking all the time and collaborating and solving problems as they go and working out what they're going to do next to achieve a broader goal, rather than acting to a particular plan that you could measure progress against. So that's one example. Another example was around some of the sort of common HR practices that are dominant out there in the world today. This idea that individuals within an organization have performance appraisals, and that in a team, you take a team, you have half a dozen, 8 people in a team, whatever. We see organizations where they're saying, okay, well, we've got to apply a Bell distribution curve to our performance of people on that team. We will assume that there's some genius in the team, and there's somebody who's a borderline duffer on the team, and in the middle we've got people who are sort of more average, if you like, and then trying to apply that to a team, and when actually in a typical team in an agile world, everybody is making an equally valid contribution usually, and if they're not, there might be issues that need to be resolved, but the underpinning idea is that everybody is pulling their weight to help achieve that purpose, playing to their strengths and covering each other's weaknesses and all of that sort of thing. And then that gets picked apart as individuals, and certain skill sets are somehow seen as more worthy than other skill sets, and therefore those get rewarded. And before you know where you are, you've got people getting different pay rises and goodness knows what, and promotions and the like, off the back of something where everybody thought they were doing their own individual best and contributing in the best way to an overall task. So those sorts of practices were really sort of stifling the adoption of real agility within
And the
those
creativity.
and to be honest, I was at the point I was ready to give it all up and go and start driving a truck, because I was getting so frustrated with what I saw as stupidity within organizations that were crippling themselves, from achieving. So yeah, and it was in that sort of a workshop around that sort of stuff that the framework just emerged, or the idea for the framework emerged. And then very quickly understanding that, it was really about people. The framework was about people. Things like agile leadership and agile culture emerged. And going back to that sort of project management office point I made, the idea of agile governance. So how do we govern things that are designed to be working in an agile way? Yeah, we can't use traditional governance structures and expect them to be as effective.
So how can organisations who are looking at transitioning or continuing to progress towards becoming an agile business, I guess, in your opinion, what key point would you highlight to those trying to implement business agility?
So I would say for every organization is different. I've worked with many organizations. They're all starting from a different place. They've all got different sort of intrinsic cultures and that sort of thing already. And they all have strengths and they all have weaknesses. So what I'd say is, if you're already, sort of pushing agile as an idea, for example, in IT for delivering software, then look at that and look at how it's actually working for you. Look at what the enablers are, what's making it work well, and think about how those can be sort of moved or scaled, if you like, outside of a software team into a broader application of business agility. Look at the things that are getting in the way of that. So, and team members, if you encourage them, are very likely to bemoan the things that are stopping them working in the way that they believe is the right way to work. And have a look at those blockers and ask, are those blockers really needed? Are they really productive in terms of the overall picture of the organization? And if they're not, try and knock those down and replace them with things that are more agile, that are more people-centric, less command and control, but at the same time should genuinely allow the leaders within the organization to tune into the people closer to the coalface, if you like. Alternatively, though, if people are coming at this fairly fresh and they've heard about some agile, what agile is, they've heard about it but don't really understand it, and are perhaps wondering how to start applying it, I think the way to look at it is around agile leadership. And most of what has been distilled by the Agile Business Consortium into its 9 principles of agile leadership, it's not new. It's drawn on wisdom that goes back decades and decades within business. But what it's done is it's taken that wisdom and it's sort of packaged it into an agile context that it can be applied. So I would say, if you're coming at it brand new, a good way to tackle it would be sort of top down from a leadership perspective.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for joining me today and explaining to us a little bit about business agility and where it sort of stems from.
My pleasure, and happy to do more of the same.
Super. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Emily.